Tonight from WOWT 6 News.
I never saw the funnel line, I just saw the blackness coming at us.
40 years have passed.
Everyone says it sounds like a train.
But the memory of a killer tornado in Omaha hasn't faded.
I remember just constantly thinking about those kids blowing out that front door.
Hundreds of homes left in pieces.
Our job then was to clean up.
Lives changed forever.
And then it hit him in the back. That's what stopped it from hitting us.
How did the community recover?
We never doubted that we would be back in business.
For the next half hour, Brian Mastre reports. Omaha remembers the 1975 tornado.
Good evening, I'm Brian Mastre coming to you from Pipple Park in Omaha. That sculpture represents what tore through the community some 40 years ago. Whenever severe weather strikes nowadays, we often expect to see the tornado live on television. But before the Nebraska tornadoes of Pilger or Hallam, before the destruction of Oklahoma City or Joplin, Missouri, there was the Omaha tornado of 1975, which at the time was the most destructive tornado in U.S. history.
Well, the weather was pretty much bad all day long.
The public knew severe weather was a possibility that Tuesday afternoon 40 years ago. But there's a big difference between strong winds, heavy rain, or some hail, and this, an F4 tornado. For a half hour, it cut a 10-mile path through Omaha using 72nd Street as a guide. Time has a way of clouding memories or making them simply disappear. For those in the metro who lived through May 6, 1975, there doesn't seem to be a memory expiration date. Teachers remember.
And then I looked out and I saw this debris blowing. I thought, uh-oh.
As do the students.
I remember it like it was yesterday.
Hundreds of families lost everything.
The whole house is destroyed.
What are you going to do now?
I don't know. I just don't know where I'm at right now.
And yet inside the rubble, they often manage to find hope.
This is a miracle to me. And even that I was here under the pool table, all of that the basement windows, the glass was flying right under it, and I kept moving back. And I'm all cut up. I just, it's just too much.
Yeah, that's my refrigerator way in the backyard there. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do. Guess what everybody else is going to do, just pitch in and help.
These numbers.
In 1975, and until he retired 24 years later,
theirs was a personal struggle.
WOWT 6 News' Gary Kerr documented those struggles. Besides a notebook, reporters carry perspective.
To me, the big story of the 1975 tornado was that only 3 people died. Now that's a tragedy, 3 people. But I'm telling you, it could have been dozens of people.
So how is it this monster tornado that tore apart 1,000 homes and 100 businesses left behind so few fatalities? Experts point to the timing and early warnings being key, and the play-by-play of Car 360 in the Omaha Police Department's fleet.
Car 360, about 78 to Mercy Road now. Debris flying everywhere.
That's Patrolman David Campbell's voice on the radio. Campbell, who in 1975 had been on the force a little over a year, had just started his evening shift.
I just happened to be in the right location at the right time.
Sirens went off in Omaha at 4:29 after a spotter reported a brief touchdown at 132nd and Harrison. 4 minutes later, the tornado was back on the ground at 96th and Q, soon hitting neighborhoods like Bay Meadows and Wentworth. Commanders tasked Officer Campbell to Interstate 80 at 72nd Street to keep drivers from heading into the tornado's path. But then the twister turned. After crossing over the interstate, it tore through the Westgate neighborhood. And that's when Officer Campbell had a decision to make.
What else can I do? Here's this large storm destroying things. Why don't I try to stay with it and give locations, but I didn't think it was going to do what it did.
Cars are flying through the air, buildings are being destroyed.
Campbell, along with a fire captain on a different radio channel, would be the eyes and ears for the city, following the tornado, dodging the debris.
And I just kept weaving my way along and keeping contact with radio.
If this would just save one life, then I had accomplished my mission.
And David Campbell today. 40 years later, the powerful images still flood through his mind.
I was hoping that the other officers in the fire department would take the information and not only get out of the way, but then fill in back and start doing what they needed to do to help people out.
Still ahead on this WOWT 6 News special report.
Nebraska Furniture had just moved from downtown out here and built a building, and it got all tore up.
Pursuit of the tornado. Officer Campbell retraces his route.
The girls were just on the other side of this wall.
Surviving disaster. How students and staff made it out of the storm alive. Plus, an iconic image from 40 years ago. Just where was this man headed? When Omaha remembers, the 1975 tornado returns.
When disaster strikes, in the days to follow, there's always a series of what-if questions. And the Omaha tornado of 1975 is no different. We're in the basement, the tornado shelter here at Westgate Elementary. The tornado destroyed this District 66 school. The shelter was not here at the time. But what if school had been in session? What if there had been students and teachers around? What if the tornado had struck sooner? Many shudder to even think about it.
Now, things were different 40 years ago because there was no after-school program. So by 4 o'clock, the building was empty.
Good thing, because a half hour later, this is all that was left of Westgate Elementary.
And I'm just so thankful that this happened at 4:38 and not 2:38. If there had been kids in the school, if this had happened an hour earlier, there would have been, I don't know how many fatalities. I can't imagine half the kids might have survived the destruction to the building. It was that bad.
The only person left inside Westgate Elementary was the night custodian.
He hid underneath the principal's desk, and and that's what saved him, because he had to dig his way out from underneath that desk.
Walking home from school, getting home, and it was just a weird coincidence. My dad decided to come home early that day from work.
J.R. Meyer was in 4th grade in 1975. He attended Westgate. He lost his school and his home.
Oh, we've had a pretty tough summer out of it.
We talked with his father a year later, the home now rebuilt.
I got home from work and the kids were, well, they had the candles out, flashlights, transistor radios, and they're all standing looking at the sky. So we was a little scared.
There's J.R. on the right in the striped shirt. His father never worked again after the tornado because of what happened as they huddled in the neighbor's basement.
You could feel the debris hitting you because the house was completely demolished and ripped off the foundation. And my dad happened to be alert enough to be looking up, and then your house has an I-beam going across the center. Before then, they never had them anchored into your foundation. They just sat free. So it just rolled off and it started scraping down the wall. That's when he jumped on myself and my brother and the neighbor girl and landed on top of us, and then it hit him in the back. That's what stopped it from hitting us. Crushed 3 vertebrae in his back, so he was disabled after that. I mean, he could walk, but yeah, he didn't go back to work after that.
40 years later, the son lives here. It's hard to let go.
Everybody pretty much rebuilt and stayed, you know. Even in, like, I know several kids that have purchased their family's house.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I have a special interest because my dad built it.
Still ahead on this WOWT 6 News special report.
The windows started breaking, and we still had a patient in the room.
A hospital preparing for the worst as walking wounded flood the emergency room. And the most popular book from the school library that no one reads. When Omaha remembers, the 1975 tornado returns.
While Westgate Elementary had no students inside at the time the tornado came through, the same could not be said here at Lewis and Clark Middle School.
Cars are flying through the air, buildings are being destroyed.
Remember Officer Campbell, who was following the tornado down 72nd Street? He watched as 200-mile-per-hour winds tossed cars like tumbleweeds.
When I saw the car tumble by, I pulled up right alongside of it. It was empty. At that point, I wasn't seeing anybody anywhere.
At this point, the tornado had already been on the ground for close to 15 minutes. According to WWT 6 News accounts, a woman drowned taking cover in the basement of a restaurant at 78th and Pacific. The tornado continued to follow 72nd Street. The Nebraska Furniture Mart destroyed, so too the Downtowner Hotel off Dodge. It was headed towards the Community Playhouse, United Methodist Church, and a middle school.
But then I looked over, and Lewis and Clark used to be a glass front building. All that exploded all at once. It was like water flying out. It just boom, and all the windows went out.
What Officer Campbell didn't know was whether anyone was inside. There was.
I'm up in the portable, and
You don't feel safe in the portable. So teacher Elaine Russell headed for the main building. She worked her way towards the gym, but there's a problem.
So I'm trying to get in, and the door won't open, but I could hear some voices in there, so I started pounding on it. And finally, somebody came and opened the door.
Cheerleader tryouts had been underway, and the girls huddled in this hallway for safety.
We sat there, and the principal had a radio, and so we could hear the path that the tornado was taking. And it was heading toward some of the homes of the girls. And so they were just, you know, in tears and worrying about their families and stuff. And then it was over. And my pockets were full of shredded glass. I figured my portable was gone.
And was it?
And it was gone, yeah.
If school had been in session, the 1,000 students at Lewis and Clark would have taken refuge in the main hallway.
All the lockers on one side were pushed in about 6 inches. It looked like a truck had come up and pushed in all the lockers.
You manage, but you don't forget.
School librarian Joanne Freeman crawled under a desk in her basement across the street from the middle school. Her home was demolished.
There were girders from the school that had flown across and wrapped around my trees. So I really didn't expect to find too much safe over here, and you just wonder how something like that can happen. I was thrilled when I saw that most of the things in the library were still there.
And in that library, look at this. It's Belle Boyd's Secret Agent. It's a hardback book. This was in the library here 40 years ago when the tornado came through, and this piece of thick window stuck inside it.
Fire lines are going out. I got a brick through my windshield.
Meanwhile, Officer Campbell stayed with the tornado for another mile. 2 more people would die along the way. One thrown from her home, another hit by debris.
I get out, and I'm looking, where the heck's this thing at? And I look, and there's a tail right there. And it's getting smaller and smaller. And I got on the radio, and I says, Car 360, I said, the tornado is dissipating at Benson Park. And I watched it go off.
With so much destruction, where do you begin?
High adrenaline storm, this thing that I went through. And now I'm seeing people, how they feel, and they're going through this. And I got all these mixed emotions. I know I did a good job, but now something's still tugging on me. I got to get to Bergen Mercy Hospital.
Officer Campbell backtracked to the hospital. Along the way, he saw firefighters and police officers helping the injured, looking for those trapped. Everyone was chipping in.
What we don't realize, unless you live through something like this, is the public are actually doing fireman work. They're finding people and pulling them out. In the police, there's civilians doing civic duty, civilian police type work. Everything was working.
This whole side of the hospital we couldn't use.
At Bergen Mercy, Pam Gaines was an 18-year-old nursing assistant.
We put him right here in the hallway. There wasn't any other place to put him.
450 patients took shelter in the hall.
We covered his head with a sheet because by that time the windows were broken, there was debris flying. It was just chaos.
With part of the building gone and gas leaking, staff had to improvise as many of the 130 injured from the tornado began to arrive for treatment.
And people were coming in there with carloads of people bleeding and hurt. and things like that. So I'm trying to direct them up there, and I know it's going to be chaos in there. Yeah, they were coming in from everywhere.
The drive back 40 years later reminded Officer Campbell of a story he hadn't shared before. Across the street from the hospital is Calvary Cemetery.
And there's a gate, and it was locked, a double gate. And a van pulls up, and there's people screaming in there, they're bloody. This guy went out and picked all these hurt people up, and he's trying to get them to the hospital, but he's on the inside of the cemetery, and he can't get through. And I'm looking at the gate, and it's chained.
A man asked to help. He didn't have bolt cutters, but he had his '55 Ford pickup.
So he takes his beautiful truck, he nudges up against the gate, he floors it, and he pushes it until the gate busts loose, and the people come in. And I went to thank the guy, and he was gone.
Still ahead on this WOWT 6 News special report.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what a tornado can do.
Some get creative finding shelter in the most unlikely places. When WOWT 6 News' Brian Mastre reports, Omaha remembers the 1975 tornado returns.
"40 years after Omaha's destructive tornado, a lot has changed in the city. Dave Getzinger still has the same employer, Calvary Cemetery. When you look back 40 years, what still strikes you about that day?
And mainly that there wasn't more people killed by it.
His story of escape that day is something of lore on these grounds.
We had a couple graves prepared for the next day that were opened up, so 2 of us jumped in one and 2 of us jumped in the other, and it basically went right over the top of us.
Many still remark that with all the lives affected, how many more could have easily ended. After all, Exarban's horse racing track was just a block from the tornado, with 9,000 people inside.
What if that tornado had gone through there? And they, after the tornado went through, they continued the race meet. For one thing, the police had blocked the gates, wouldn't allow people to leave because they didn't want them to go out into the chaos of the aftermath of that tornado.
In the fall of '75, Westgate Elementary opened just a week late for school, 82 days to rebuild. The neighborhood school with a tornado shelter now meant even more to this neighborhood.
We had lots of neighbors who would come over and use that shelter because they felt safer there than in the basements of their home.
They seem to play that video every May 6th, and I guess that my wife says it's my 30 seconds of fame.
It's iconic film from the WOWT 6 News archive. Dan Nestander left his post as a mechanic at the Sears Crossroads. His car couldn't get through the debris by Lafayette Street, so he ran to see if his fiancée was okay.
My wife's house was very fortunate that it didn't get a lot of damage on it. Of course, she was worried about her wedding dress inside there.
The dress was fine, still hanging on the back of a door. The two will celebrate 40 years of marriage in July.
We easily could have moved out of this house.
Joanne Freeman just sold her home across the street from Lewis and Clark. Every anniversary, she's reminded of what she spotted after climbing out of her damaged home that May 6th.
I found a bottle of scotch. I thought, this will serve us all well.
Now I'm finally getting
Officer Campbell still hears from people who remember his scanner reports that afternoon in 1975. As he retraced his route, he took a detour to a place he's never stopped before.
And in Omaha lucked out that it wasn't worse than fatalities and things, but Omaha that was strong enough to rebuild. And this is part of some building somewhere. I knew this was here, but it took 40 years to come and see it.
We also found a handful of people who saved their clocks from that day when the power went out. Time frozen. Eerie, but for many it was a reminder of the resilience of Omaha. Thanks for watching with photographer Jim Hinchik and all who helped craft the stories back in the day. I'm Brian Mastre reporting.